yet another episode of Indigenization Appreciation Hour. I'm Saurav Jha, and joining me as always is my long-term associate Sriram Tyagarajan. There's lots to talk about in today's episode because lots has been going on in this part of the world, as it were, and of course we have this whole thing that we need to look at, which is what are we going to do what are we going to do in the next 5 years to make sure that our principal adversary is kept at bay. I'm essentially talking about the ways and means that we must adopt to ensure that deterrence holds vis-a-vis the People's Republic of China. And as I've said before, it is unlikely that any campaign orchestrated by the PRC will be sort of led by any kind of ground operation. It'll be an air and missile campaign in the main, very likely in concert with the Pakistanis, the so-called Western adversary, and any forward movement along into across the line of actual control will be contingent on the sort of the progress of the air and missile campaign, or on the contours of the air and missile campaign. I do not see the Chinese mounting a major war of occupation on India. In fact, they won't. They are unlikely to do that. But even then, there are of course things that India must do to ensure that you know no matter which way the air and missile, the air and space campaign sort of goes, the Chinese at the very least should be deterred from taking advantage of that to push the line of actual control westwards. Now, let us talk about what has been going on of late. Obviously, in the wake of Operation Sindoor, there is much, deliberation underway. I think in all three capitals, that is New Delhi, Beijing, and Islamabad, as to what the next round is going to look like. Right. So everybody is planning. Make no mistake about that. And obviously, Beijing and Islamabad are planning together at some level for certain. This we can take it for granted that they are. Islamabad will be thinking probably on two parallel tracks. One would be what can they do to deter the kind of wide-ranging strikes that were inflicted on their military targets, and of course prior to that on certain terrorist targets by the Indian Air Force in the event that there are hostilities. That is one scenario. That is a scenario where they fight alone essentially, and such a scenario could unfold, subsequent to a terrorist strike on India by the Pakistanis. So they would be preparing for that scenario. And the other scenario that they would be preparing for would be a sort of a joint campaign against India in concert, as I keep saying, together with their so-called Iron Brothers, across the Himalayas. That would be the second kind of scenario they would be planning for. A third, of course, for the Pakistanis, there is another thing that the Pakistan Air Force by itself would be preparing for, would be the ways and means by which they could say deter an Indian blockade of the Pakistani coastline, or at least that of Karachi. Right, that is something that the Pakistan Air Force and Pakistan Navy must be pretty much thinking about quite a bit, since it has been, in some ways, it has been openly announced that something of that sort may well result if Pakistan were to again sort of mount a major terrorist attack on, or orchestrate a major terrorist attack on Indian territory. So that is also something they're definitely thinking about. What were, as far as the Chinese are concerned, the key takeaways for from Operation Sindoor for them was of course the performance of their J-10C and the PL-15, and not just standalone, the performance of these systems in a network environment. That was the key takeaway for the Chinese. And in any case, if you look at the way PLF thinking has evolved, they are very clear that that warfare in the 21st century is going to be system on systems, and it is going to be on who, and whoever has the more, the whoever has the more intelligent network is going to
Hey, hold on. I can't hear you. Can't hear you. Mhm. Yeah, for once it's not me. Can't hear you. No. Hey, it says you're muted. I think you've hit mute on your screen.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you hit mute by mistake.
No, I didn't hit it. There's something going on my computer. But anyway, now
Okay. Yeah, you're good now.
because I got rid of some of the added systems that were there.
Yeah,
Anyway,
go ahead.
so whatever. Since the
Hey,
change,
sharp eyes. Somebody pointed that out in the comments. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So might as well since my train of thought has been thwarted by my own systems. I hope that doesn't happen to us in combat though. So might as well use this opportunity to thank some people who've been sort of supporting DDR. So at the outset, I would like to thank Shashank Dixit and Rajiv Pandey for their rather generous contributions made last month. Right. So there'll be others as well whom we'll probably thank in the next episode. So thank you for that. And we would of course like others to emulate their example and sort of support us. And those who have been sort of supporting us anyway should continue to do so. So Sriram, I would request you to put up that
Yeah,
QR
did
code
that.
and the
Did that.
yeah, it's done, right? So
Yeah.
that's happening. So you have the QR code is visible, and of course you can send the money directly to this UPI ID as well, which is a JDR LTD 2367 at UPI. Let although it sounds repetitive, but we pay GST on all your contributions. So that
Yeah.
is
So
also there.
to get you back on your
Yeah.
train of thought, there's a question from Corpsis. Yeah. Can you give a proper breakdown of how any future clash as part of our Operation Sindoor or whatever new name we might give? His question is particularly on the Western Front, but I would say think of it as a two-front situation, right? And maybe take a guess as to how things might, evolve into a conflict and what we need to do to deter, and obviously, if that fails, to actually fight. There's a lot to cover, but yeah, I think we can start and we can add things as we go on.
Okay, so let's get into that. So let's look at something.
Can you
First
put your
of
hands
all,
down?
how it may start is very simple. If it starts, it will again start with a provocation from the Pakistani side. That is how all of these things start, and it is likely to start that way in the future as well. See, the current situation is not one of equilibrium, right? The Indus Water Treaty stands in abeyance, while at the moment, the Pakistanis aren't really facing any great diversion of downstream flows or anything, apart from probably seasonal variations and whatever is going on in terms of their whether we don't know whether they are being informed about sluice gates opening and shutting and stuff like that about essentially our scheduling. Probably they are, probably they aren't. We can't say for certain. But what we can say is that the situation is certainly not settled, as it were, right? And you heard the one Pakistani general talk about how they are going to stop sort of our breathing. They're going to stop our breathing if we stop their water, essentially. So so the threats are out there on the table anyway. Now the question is that essentially, see, the Pakistanis have three options as far as the starting precipitating something is concerned. One is they can revert to their old strategy, or some would say strategy that never really stopped, of trying to bleed India by 1,000 cuts by orchestrating terrorist attacks, on the in the Indian mainland. That is not just inside Jammu and Kashmir, but elsewhere, maybe in the big cities, so on and so forth. And they might look to use deniables for this. They would not, leave their footprints. They would not really leave the same kind of footprints that they may have left in the case of the Pahalgam attack. They may try to use homegrown terror, as it were, to sort of orchestrate these attacks. That is something
Yeah,
that they could possibly look at.
we've already seen a couple of such instances. One was the Rameshwaram Cafe
Yeah,
attack in Bangalore,
but
and one in Coimbatore, which
yeah,
thankfully failed because
but
their
those
workmanship was
are
terrible.
yeah, those are child run, some do it yourself chap, maybe radicalized over the internet. But what I am talking about is people who've been trained, who are from here, have been trained in Pakistan, who may have exfiltrated India via Bangladesh or Nepal, and went to Pakistan and Afghanistan for training and have been sent back here. Those are the kinds of people that I am talking about now. That could be one strategy. The other strategy could be mounting another very, very sort of open sort of attack like they did in Pahalgam. But that, in my view, that sort of a provocation is not something they would want to do on their own. If they do something like that, then they may do something in concert with the then it might mean that that joint campaign that we keep talking about, where both the Chinese and the Pakistani sort of come at us, that is the sort of thing that they might want to trigger. That would be the raison behind any such attack on India. And such an attack may not be one attack; it may be a series of attacks. And in this scenario, they may not actually attack only civilian targets. They may attack targets that sort of hit our logistics chain, or they may try to do a couple of Pathankot style attacks. Things in the northern sector that sort of tie in with that air and space campaign that we sort of keep talking about. This is what they would do. Now, how would it begin? Well, they would obviously, the Indian response, the Indian doctrine now is clear. The short term doctrine is any act of terrorism is an act of war. So obviously, the Indian military will look to engage the Pakistan military in a situation like this. It won't go unanswered. Now, the Pakistanis would do something like this only after they have recapitalized themselves with certain equipment. Right? We've heard that the J-31 is now almost certain to be delivered much sooner than it was earlier believed. So they are going to start working with those. The pilots have already been training in China, as if you go by reports. So they'll look to integrate the J-31 very quickly. Obviously, with the J-31, they will bring in some new systems. I mean, new air-to-air systems, because that is the one domain in which they sort of continue to fancy themselves, at least in the opening stages, right? When the rules of engagement may not be what they are, but this time they won't have the luxury of that. So what I think is they're going to use those J-35s, the J-35s, not J-31s, J-35s, because those were, I mean, what was FC-31 at one time, but J-35 now. The J-35s they're going to use in a in a role, in a anti-AWACS, anti-high value target role, in my opinion. They're going to probably get the non-export version of the PL-15E, or a special export version, which will have a sort of a range of over 200 kilometers or so. And they will look to take out our AWACS in the first wave. That will be one of the things on their agenda. They would also try to use the J-35 in a destruction of enemy air defenses kind of role against our S-400s and MR-SAMs. That would also be something that they would want to do. But this campaign, but once this starts, I think the next time over, it could well be that the Chinese come in, and the Chinese will most certainly begin with a series of ballistic missile strikes and cruise and DF-17 strikes on our key air bases along near the line of actual control. So it's going to be an extremely violent campaign mounted by enemies if they choose to do so, which is why we keep talking about resilience and the fact that we may need to take the initiative. If we see, the Chinese have long had this doctrine that if war is inevitable, you might as well gain the initiative and strike first, right? So in our case, we should carefully observe what is going on, and we should not be afraid to preempt either, because there's no point in absorbing so many blows from in a two-front air and missile campaign, which is almost certainly going to be accompanied by by a well-orchestrated information warfare campaign globally, where our so-called natural allies will also not take our side, as you saw recently, right? So the whole agenda would be to humiliate India, destroy our assets, and generally push us to second-tier status in Asia. That would be the agenda. And of course, there are other agendas for the Chinese. They'll get to test their battle networks. They'll get to find out more about how high intensity campaigns are orchestrated. All of this is something that they want for for their own sort of internalization. So they would want those things. Our job would be to either deter a scenario like this, for which we need to make a series of investment, which we'll talk about, or B, to actually take the initiatives ourselves if we see that such a scenario is becoming inevitable, and the these things can be picked up. We have to up our human intelligence game in the interim, even as we start deploying more satellites. Although I don't see those satellites, I don't really have any visibility right now. Maybe here we need to leverage the private sector, because there are private sector players who are doing incredible work on hyperspectral imaging, etc., on fusing hyperspectral imaging with UIR. We need to get their birds in the sky from wherever. Even if there is no domestic capacity to get it in the sky, get it in the sky from the world market. But we need to start, putting that ISR leg in place, and we should look beyond just those 50 large satellites we are thinking of. Anyway, so with that, let me now go over to Sriram, because I'm sure he has thoughts on this issue. So I think, Sriram, you should now share with the viewers what you think.
Yeah. So, like you said, the initial phases, if we do not begin the whole thing, will be us defending heavily and making use of whatever nascent rocket force that we have, as well as sending up the Air Force to do counter air missions. I'm sure when things get hot enough, we'd already be doing combat air patrols, to borrow an American term, do fighter sweeps, and then if things go really hot, then we might send in our own fighters against theirs to take them out either in the air or on the ground. So that's one side of things. But see, the whole front is pretty huge, all the way from Ladakh to eastern Arunachal Pradesh, right? So, like you just said, we need a lot of work to go into the ISR side of things. There was a question about status of the Netra Mark II. It's not even begun. It's stuck on airframe modifications for the moment. So you can imagine how long it'll take to even get started with the program, right? So these are things that should have, gotten fixed by now, and we should have been getting the first article ready to, get to IOC. But here we are. So we might, and if we get into a conflict within the next 5 years, we most likely will be going in short in terms of numbers, at least in the Air Force side of things, right? Maybe air defense, I think, will have enough, or at least approach, having enough assets in place, radars and missiles for that matter, because I'm sure the QRSAM order is going to go in next year, and maybe even the Akash NG might see orders in a couple of years once the user rails complete. So by 2030, we should be having the beginnings of a decent modern AD system. And given, I think the density of AD all along the Western Front was a very, very pleasant surprise to a lot of people, including those who've been following these things, right, for a long time. We've seen the orders, we've seen all the programs, but we never, until you see it in action, you really can't tell how effective something is. The L-70, for instance, right? Counter UAS systems, all of them, not just the L-70. So, given how effective they've been and how dense our AD has been, all the way from Kutch to Jammu and beyond, and nearly everything that has tried to come in has been shot down. So what we're seeing is, at least we should give the appropriate credit to all the planners and executors, all the way from MOD or down to the services, who've put this in place, and the Akash theory system itself, and the IACCS, and seamlessly making everything work together. So I'm sure we can see something similar all along the northern and eastern sectors, right? Once all of the newer systems also come into place, we'll have more Akash orders, the 1S orders with the Seeker, and we've already got more WLRs, the mountain versions. We've got a lot of EW and ELINT systems, particularly for the mountains. We're seeing artillery orders, and we're seeing a lot of ground-based AD anyway, right? And I think it was a year and a half back when the Eastern Command, called up a whole bunch of journalists and gave them a nice tour, and we could see images with the MR-SAM in there. So again, layered AD, I think they must have learnt quite a lot from this Operation Sindoor, let's call it phase 1 if you want, right? So, and they I'm sure they would have studied all of it and figured out where things need to be improved, and we will see a better system implemented all across, right? West, north, east, wherever you want to call it. So we should see all of this in place. The only issue is eyes, right? We do not have enough AWACS. We're hearing news reports that the follow-on Netra Mark 1A, which is just an upgraded version of the current 3 Netra Mark 1s that the Air Force has, that might go in sooner. And we at DDR heard that the proposal came from the Indian Air Force, saying they want a bunch of 6 AWACS on the same ERJ platform. And even the source for the airframes, right? Second-hand airframes has also been looked at by the Air Force themselves. So they have identified possible sources for these airframes. So I think once the go-ahead is given, it might move a lot faster. And given the proficiency in radar systems by DRDO's radar lab, LRDE, as well as private sector companies, as well as CABS, who's the lead integrator and the kind of the boss for the AWACS and airborne electronics platforms. They have a lot of experience by now, so they should do a pretty good job once they have the airframes in place and a solid order for 6 units. This should this should be a low risk program, because they're going to put in newer technology in the radar, but essentially the physics of it is the same. You don't need new wind tunnel testing and all of that. As long as they meet weight and power budgets, I think they should be fine. And even for power, if needed, I'm sure they can find an upgraded APU to put it in the back. So that is, it should have been part of the original AWACS plan, and we should have had 12 of them at least, and had an improved version of another 12 later on. But yeah, better late than never. The main programs that we still lack are the bigger AWACS, the A319 based ones. Like I just said, the whole thing is stuck on discussions with the OEM on airframe modifications, and until that gets sealed up, the program is not going to move forward. Yeah, hopefully in a few years, right? But yeah, I think we heard about the program in 21, and we're 4 years down the line, and practically nothing's moved. Anyway, let's hope for the best. The other thing, again, is your airborne electronic warfare and comm jam systems, and the ISTAR program. So those are very, very important for the ground war. So if we do end up going beyond the infantry in the mountains, and there are very few places for armored warfare along the entire front with the Chinese. I'm sure Saurav knows a lot more about this. And in the west, right, it's all plains, all the way from Gujarat to even Jammu. And then you get into the mountains. But once you get into Pakistan, it is not mountains anymore. It's all plains. So you definitely need airborne presence to, help and guide the ground war. And, Comjam, ISARs, they're all pretty much focused on the ground war. So those need to get off the ground. There's been practically zero progress since we heard about these programs 4 or 5 years back. So again, all of this needs work. And no matter how much you keep saying that things are improving, the default state of our acquisitions and program management is snail space, unless some real need comes up suddenly and somebody wakes up and says, hey, we need this program, then things start moving. Right. So these are, especially with support assets, refuelers. We've gone through the whole process 3 times, 4 times since mid 2000s. We're in 2025 June, and we still haven't bought even 3 refuelers. So that's that. I think we can put all our airborne, monitoring aircraft programs in the same line as the MRTT acquisitions. Anyway, so we will be slightly shortchanged on airborne surveillance, but that's how we might have to fight for at least another 5 years, maybe even 7-8 years, best case. But past that, like Saurav was saying, right, space is faster and I dare say easier to build capability at the moment for us. All the small startups, the space startups, have got initial number of satellites in space. If the government is really keen and the forces are really keen, I'm sure we can give them adequate support to really bring down the cycle time so that they can learn from that, and then they can really build out largest sized constellations and assured business from the government saying, look, we definitely want your capability. We will give you so much business because we need it desperately. We have ISRO assets, and we also want your assets. So we can work out a business plan, and we'll give you this much business, and it'll give them visibility, and they can take that to whatever investors they have lined up and say, look, we have assured business for the next God knows how many years, and you can fund us to expand and build on our progress that we've already made. I know there's some TDF work and some IDIS work being done at the services level, but it needs a lot more thrust. Let's see. Until we see the 10 satellites each from each company for each technology, right? Hyperspectral, LEO, IR, SAR, all of these. I think we'll have to keep cribbing that the government needs to do more. But again, we'll come back to the last thing, which is fighter acquisitions. We definitely need to
Anyway,
kick on.
so that's the point, right? If the government gives them visibility on orders, they will get the funds that they need from private investors to scale up.
Correct.
The government will not be doing anybody any favors. The government will be tanking up on critical national capability by supporting these startups. And you can easily separate the wheat from the chaff in as far as such startups are concerned. There are those who have clear capability and they have been able to demonstrate it also. So you back those guys. There are also other ISR, atmospheric ISR capability, let me put it that way, that you can bring to bear in a rather short time frame. You should with just legacy systems put together in a more innovative way, along with state of the art approaches for sensing and imaging. So you can do that. Those capabilities exist within India. All of those should be leveraged to sort of meet the ISR gap, as I would put it, to borrow a Cold War terminology. India today has a clear ISR gap vis-a-vis the PRC, and it's a widening gap at the moment. You have to run doubly fast to start, making it smaller, the gap smaller at the. So, and the only way you can do that is by leveraging the private sector. This is the way to kick off the space industry. It is by kicking off the defense space industry that you will actually kick off the overall space industry in India. Not by having them do some project, demonstrate something, wait for the next round of funding, not get orders, not be clear about what they are doing, wait for this. That's not how you do things at all. That moment is here. Let me be clear, this is an era of war. Okay, this is an era of war, and we need to be ready for that. I know what somebody has said, but I am saying that this is an era of war. And I think all of you who are listening to this podcast can feel it in your bones that this is indeed an era of war, and we need to be prepared to A, deter war, because that is what we always look to do, and B, if war is inevitable, to prosecute it in the right kind of way. And by right kind of way is a way that is based on preparation, right? That is the right kind of way to prosecute a war, not to be unprepared, essentially. So preparedness is the key for the next 5 years. The next 5 years are a critical time for India and the world, obviously, because this is an era of war, like I said, and it will be before the early 2030s that the current era of war will again give away to a new era of some kind of peace, which will be different from what has happened before. But it will not be this era of war, is my prognostication, obviously. But this will continue till the early 2030s, and we should be ready for the kind of era we find ourselves in. That is something that everybody must now become aware of, and must sort of get themselves ready for. And especially the country, we talk about a whole of nation approach. Whole of First we said, talked about a whole of government approach. Okay, maybe the whole of government approach is beginning to, we are seeing some visibility on that, but we are not seeing visibility on the whole of nation approach. The whole of nation approach does not happen with the private sector simply raising its hand and saying, I am willing to do something. They've been raising that hand forever now. The whole of nation approach happens when the government takes into confidence the private sector, and not just takes it into confidence, but reposes confidence in it. You have to show confidence in your private sector. You have to put your money where your mouth is. That is what you have to do in a democracy. This is not the People's Republic of China, where some bureaucrat will ideate about civil military fusion, and and they'll just pick up a phone and say, "Hey, get your semi-trailer trucks ready. We are commandeering all of them for use in Tibet to move some, ZTQ 15 somewhere." That's not the kind of thing you'll have in India. At a time of war, you may have to do that. You've done such things probably in previous conflicts because of what are called emergent situations. But what is required is for everybody to get on the same page. See, everybody has got used to what I call the laxity of the liberalization era, right? Every people have now a lot many more people have got cars. Obviously, a lot of people still don't have vehicles. A lot of people are still in poverty, and I'm talking about hundreds of millions in any category, right? But the point is that a lot many have never had it so good. Okay, they've sent their children to America. They got used to a world where there was the bombing would happen in some far off place which had rubbed America the wrong way, or had simply been essentially identified by America for cancellation, as it were. Okay, that is how people had come to think. They did not think that they would live in a world where they would have to switch off the lights again at night and hear some drone swarm buzzing over their head, or see a cruise missile strike happen on a bloody wall. Sorry for my language. On a water tank, on a large water tank near their town. They did not think that they lived in a world like this. But people need to wake up and smell the coffee. And obviously, not just people. I think people have woken up due to Operation Sindoor. Everybody needs to wake up, and the government needs to understand that you have to leverage the private sector properly. For that, you need to see what the private sector can offer, need to give them some visibility on orders so that they can scale up and deliver. And I'm talking about the next 12 months to prepare. 6 months, there should be targets for 6 months, 12 months. Such targets are already there for drones, small drones and stuff like that. Swarm drones, autonomous drones, drones that are that have anti-spoofing capability, and I commend the military and the government for that approach. But even there, it's still piecemeal. The orders have to be in the hundreds of thousands. Okay, the minimum order quantity has to be way, way, way bigger, and it has to. And this notion of no cost, no commitment, NC procurement. I bought 36 quick reaction fighting vehicles from the Tatas. NC procurement. Okay, this cannot be how you go about things. It should be AC procurement. Okay, all cost, all commitment procurement. Not no cost, no commitment procurement. That is for a different era. That is for an era of peace, which is now behind us at the moment. That new era of peace may come, provided we are ready for it and we prepared for it. That era of peace will come. I'm sure it will come, but it should not come with us having been left humiliated in any way by the People's Republic of China. It should come in an era where the People's Republic of China fails to meet its dastardly aims vis-a-vis the Republic of India, vis-a-vis Indian democracy, and is an era where the People's Republic of China reaps the whirlwind for its actions. That is the era of peace that we want. We don't want an era of peace where somebody is dreaming about hum tumhare saase rok denge, or somebody is dreaming about hum tumhara Brahmaputra rok denge, or third is dreaming about we will break you into 50 pieces, or fourth is saying that you can't be part of this or you can't be part of that, you just buy my goddamn F-21 pig, right? It cannot be such a world. This is not a world that India wants to be in, and should not be a world that India aspires to be in. Aspires to be in. So the way is, of course, not to just shout. The way is not to shout at all. The way is to prepare. The way is to prepare by leveraging your private sector properly. And that ISR gap has to be filled using the private sector. Just like you have filled the drone gap using the private sector and are filling it further. And are sort of and if you continue on the right path, you're going to be in a very good position. You have to fill that ISR space gap, and also you can have other ISR platforms also by leveraging the private sector. That is what you need to focus on, rather than always talking about 114 MMRCA from here or some stuff from there. Projects that have a gestation period of a lifetime, basically, in India. Okay, one's lifetime can go by.
To bolster that point, right? So these are launch statistics for Rocket Lab's Electron small satellite launch vehicle. They've done 65 launches so far. So just scrolling through them, right? This is the name of the customer. Sorry. Yeah, right? So look at the customers. They started launching in 2017, right? So if you go down, you'd see that you have NASA launches, DARPA, US Air Force, US SOCOM, right? And then Black Sky is a space-based intelligence company. So they supply imagery and intelligence data to customers worldwide. Obviously, the US government always, and all the acronymed agencies, right? US SPC is obviously Space Operations Command, right? So already, just in the 3 years, you've had so many government launches. Club all of them together, right? It could be NASA, it could be DARPA, it could be Special Operations, Air Force, right? Or even specialized companies like Planet Labs or Black Sky, who supply information and intelligence, right, data to the government. So, just see, and then you have NRO launches in 2020, right? First one, second one, right? Capella Space and Planet Labs both offer space-based imagery, and obviously governments rely on them, right? So Black Sky again, Black Sky, Space Force, Black Sky, and even since Pective does similar stuff, NASA, NRO, right? NOAA is their atmospherics agency. SNSA is Swedish National Space Agency. Hawkeye 360 is an RF, particularly focused on RF intelligence from space, meaning who transmits what electronically, communication links and radars and stuff like that, right? So you can see that a whole bunch of NRA, NASA, NRO, NASA, see, you have so many government, particularly NATSEC agencies, placing so many orders, right, from a small sat launcher. And even the forthcoming launches, you can see that there's a lot of government business being given to these. So the point remains, right? So the government not just needs to create an ecosystem so that such companies can come up and survive. To survive, they need business. And the best business in town is obviously the government. It is easier for such companies to come up. They might be agile, they might be better at pushing newer technologies into production. So leveraging their presence and their capabilities is a must. You cannot keep doing what you've done for the last 70 years. You need to look forward. You need to stop being afraid of giving business to private industries, especially in NatSec and intelligence fields. You cannot have fears that these things will get politicized, or just inbuilt innate fear of the private sector and the whole risk averse mindset of, until you actually launch somebody else's product, I will not come and give you even 1 rupee worth of business. Taking a bet on somebody in the hope that they will do certain things for you is something the government must do. There are loads of things that the government wastes money on. and in a lot of our opinions, I'm sure we can cut so many programs, right, that do not deserve to be on the government expenditure list. If take a call, right, you can let's say you can be a venture capitalist light, throw money on 100 programs. Even if like 2 or 3 fructify, then you still generate jobs, because even the ones that fail, the people will learn, and tomorrow they might go on to do something better and they might succeed there. Ultimately, you're also building capital. It's like spending money on R&D, right? The D part is this: you have to be willing to spend money and let people try and fail without adverse consequences. You can't go back and tell them, I will give you 10 crores today, develop something. If you succeed, fine, you can make profits out of it. If you fail, you have to give me the 10 crores back. That is not how R&D works, right? So you need to be able to fund people, support them, give them what they want, what they need. Forget what they want, what they need, right? If you do and something fructifies and something good comes out of it, then your entire ecosystem will make use of it, right? One company developing something that might be useful for a whole bunch of industries around them, right? So some capability that we did not have, if that comes up, then a whole host of capabilities will develop out of it, right? If you have a small sat launcher who works across the city, it would be easier to deal with him and send up rockets from within your own country rather than having to send it to Europe or US or French Guyana, right? It saves a lot of time, it saves a lot of money, especially while developing and getting things ready for the launch. It's not just the launch, right? So all of these have a lot of knock-on effects. It will cut down your timelines. It will cut down time required to put something in space, right? Because you don't have to travel back and forth. You don't have to spend thousands and lakhs of rupees in shuttling to the US or the EU to go and talk to their engineers for interface and payload integration, all of that. If he's if you live in Yelanka and that guy lives in Koramangala, you can brave Bangalore weather. It's easier than going to the airport and flying 24 hours to the US. So such things help, right? So that is why you need so many capabilities in your own country, because they help other capabilities to be built around them.
Yeah, and those capabilities exist in the interim, the next 12 months. See, apart from the long-term vision that you just outlined, in the next 12 months, you can readily identify people with capability. You don't have to throw good money after bad. You're going to throw the public, you're not going to throw, you're going to assign the public taxpayers' money the taxpayers' money in a direction that will actually protect the taxpayer in the scenarios that we outlined right at the outset. There are that ISR gap has to be filled using the private sector, and there are credible players in that domain right now with who are doing very important things. See, one other thing is there is a tendency in India to be incredulous about somebody who's done something new which may not be available elsewhere, right? That is another leap of faith that the government must take. It must wait, it must be ready to see what these guys have done, vet it properly, and then move forward quickly, not via the same old methods. See, you were talking about what we are doing. So that on the A319, we the three A319s have been sort of earmarked for the SCA basically, which is the ComJam, which is a new kind of SIGINT sort of scheme, SIGINT aircraft. Right, we don't have visibility on that, as you said. We don't know. Maybe there is some forward movement, but there should be faster forward movement. Then
No,
there
there
is
isn't. There isn't any
yeah,
yet. There
yeah.
isn't
Then
any
you
yet.
talked about the I-Star program. That thing was in developmental hell because of the fact that we sort of wanted to do it with the Americans, and now we moved away from them. So it's not even called I-Star anymore. It's called VISR-AX, right? VISR AX. That's what the program is called now. So you have all those situations, and of course the A321 is going to be the platform for the Netra Mark II. But the point remains this: that these are things that you can look at. These are things that are maybe 3 to 5 years away. But what is not 3 to 5 years away is the Netra Mark 1A, where you're going to use pre-owned aircraft to basically mount the same kind of thing that you already have, with better specifications, with improvements, with iterative improvements that you've learned from your program, from your earlier program. Of course, there are some very new things also, but you can still deliver that relatively quickly. So you need to move forward on that. Similarly, there are space companies in India, startups, which have done a lot of great work on things like training on the edge, on putting together
Pixel,
different
Galaxy.
kinds of imagery. You need to look at them more closely and use them, because you need to. What happens when the balloon goes up? Somebody asked what happens when the balloon will go up. One thing I can predict to you when the balloon will go up is that the government of India will be tapping every conceivable source of commercial imagery, commercial satellite imagery. This is something that they will be doing when the balloon goes up, right? Because although we do have our own national assets, but they are not going to be adequate for the kind of situation we are going to face, which will extend from all the way in Kibitu to Karachi. That is the kind of front we are going to face, a single consolidated front, if the worst case scenario comes to be. If we have to stop the worst case scenario from coming to be, we have to be ready to deter our enemies and to punish Pakistan every now and then if required. So one of the things that we need to do is, of course, the VHF radars that you're seeing already. Social media is full of pictures of two or three different types of indigenous VHF radars. One of which, of course, not indigenous, is something that has been developed in collaboration with somewhere else. So you're seeing movement on that. You need to see movement on UHF radars. What you will not see is a huge amount of work that will go into networking those radars, because they will they will prove crucial to countering both the J35 and of course the J20 on the other side, and maybe on this side also. You never know if the the Chinese move some J20s to the west as well. They well could, because there are the interoperability between Chinese and Pakistani forces seems to be rising all the time. Not the least because the Pakistanis are now essentially bringing in Chinese origin equipment for their air force in particular. So that is one thing. Another thing that you need is the rocket force that we keep talking about. So you need to increase BrahMos production. You need to push the Pralay into. You need to find a way to produce the Pralay in numbers. You need to produce some other system in numbers. You need to do that. You need to create much more secure networks in general. You need to have new electronic warfare systems that are under development. You need to deploy them en masse. When I say en masse, I don't mean you deploy them en masse as in you spread them like an L70 AD gun or something. By en masse, what I mean is you order enough numbers so that they are churned out quickly, and you can, you have enough coverage. And some of those are quite state of the art. We can't go into details of those, obviously. So those are the things that you now need to do, and probably you're doing a lot of this, but you need to move even quicker, and you need to bring in the private sector. And the private sector can really help you on the ISR front. They can help you on the drone front, as you've seen. They are going to on the small, loitering munitions front, etc. The larger conglomerates are already helping you on the artillery munitions front, munition for various types of Indian Artillery Corps and also by other arms of the Indian Army, so on and so forth. Another thing the private sector can help you on is air to ground munitions, right? Cheaper air to ground munitions that can be built quickly. This is something that the Indian Air Force needs to embrace. And also on systems which are quite capable, but maybe cheaper than your most capable systems. That is another arena where the private sector can help the Indian Air Force. So and the Indian Navy also naturally, because many of the systems that the the Air Force can bring in, the Navy can bring in too. So those that is the sort of approach you now need to have. Now let us go to some questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Let's just address one thing. Spartan Ray. See, the whole point is that there are so many programs and technology development processes that need to be sanctioned, but the government is just sitting on a whole host of files. I'll give you a small example. Um, yeah, it should be. See, something as similar as a naval MF star equivalent, right? So, and I've spoken to not just one ex director of radar systems. The conversion of say something like an Arudra into a 4-panel radar and putting it on a ship is not technically that difficult. And a proposal for this was sent to naval headquarters as well as other power centers in New Delhi. And it has gathered dust for what, close to 6 years now. And we've not seen any push for it from either the Navy or the government. But we are perfectly willing to spend tens of millions in buying the whole MF Star plus Barakat, what the Navy used to call LRSAM, but is now reclassified as an MRSAM system. Why? Why not build out the next generation of corvettes and frigates and destroyers with our own radars? Right, there's your answer for why we keep saying we should, government should.
no. The thing is, this
Right?
is
So that's
indigenization appreciation hour, and
correct.
one aspect of appreciating indigenization is to push for what is right. What we have outlined is the state of affairs, and I can say this with certainty. The state of affairs is that much more needs to be done on the ISR front, and much more needs to be done to leverage the Indian private sector for that purpose, for said
Not
purpose.
just ISR. I'm talking across the whole gamut of defense capabilities.
Yeah, across. But see, the private sector does not have capability as across the entire gamut at the moment. One of the low hanging fruit is the ISR business, right?
Yeah,
Where they can bring a lot of things to the table quite quickly, and that is
correct.
where we need to focus.
And it can be amortized over the civilian side of things, where there is also demand for a lot of things.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
land records and putting them together with space-based surveillance. Anyway, let's go back to front. Manjunath Avare, thank you for your contribution. What is the state of Nirdesh and the Indian National Defense University? Nirdesh was set up way back by the previous UPA government, and nothing much has moved. Now the government wants to give a solid impetus to shipbuilding, civilian side of shipbuilding within the country, build VLCCs, ULCCs, for containers also, goods traffic. So maybe if the current political scenario continues and the Chinese still continue playing hardball, the government might be forced to actually build capability in terms of civilian shipbuilding for really safeguarding our interests in global trade, right? Currently, the Chinese build all the big carriers. The Koreans do a lot of similar business. Their shipbuilding capability is head and shoulders above ours, and that kind of capability takes a lot of money and takes a lot of effort. And see, with HAL, a lot of civilian as well as former Air Force personnel. I mean, I'm not sliding anybody, but just saying, they keep saying that if only HAL was run by an Air Force officer, things might be a lot better. All the big naval shipyards are run by naval officers, but you do not see them to be on par with the Korean shipyards, let alone the Chinese shipyards. So that isn't really an issue, right? I know we've gone off on a tangent, but just trying to answer your question. Until the government actually puts its foot down, put somebody really serious and driven and visionary in charge of, revamping all our shipyards and getting them to get to on at least somewhere close to the Korean shipyards, then we might see progress on all of this. Otherwise, it'll just continue for the next 10 years.
But here I'll give a qualifying statement. Say something like submarine building. It is not really something which you can leverage off, your overall shipbuilding capability. It's a very specific domain. There are certain things you can, if you have a very deep supply chain, obviously your submarine building program will be assisted by that. But it has its own pedigree, right? And the Koreans and the Japanese have worked assiduously on that front. They have they have their own very unique philosophies. So the Japanese, they tend to retire ships early. You would notice that their submarines are vessels early. Their submarines are retired at the 20-year mark and not at the 40-year mark. But they don't retire these submarines in toto. They retain them as training vessels and use those for iterative slash iterative developments. So that is one thing that they do, which allows them to, and they sort of begin the design of the next class even as they have just
Building
started building the
first units
class before that
of the current class.
of the current class. That's how they go about things. Koreans are different. Obviously, Korea, as its industrial capability grew, it sort of went from license production to completely absorbing the design and then launching its own designs. That is what it has done. But the German legacy is very much there, and it had brought in German experts as well. In fact, the top German experts who could be called one of the fathers of the Type 209, he sort of spent a lot of time in Korea. So they did that, and now they are exporting like crazy. In fact, they are looking to export 6 units to Bangladesh now, right? So they sort of make up for whatever expenditure they have undertaken through exports on the development. They amortize it through exports as well. So this is how they go about things. Whereas we allow hiatuses to happen. We allow one hiatus, then we allow another hiatus, then we allow a third hiatus. Okay, and essentially allow the attrition of very hard-won design and manufacturing, capabilities. Right? We This is how we go about things. What we need to do now is to have all three shipyards in India that can produce submarines, as identified by one committee almost a decade, more than a decade ago right now, right? We should place orders on all of them so that there are no hiatuses in the future, because the numbers we require even for SSKs is very high. It's definitely not what is currently projected, given that we are going to face a whole bunch of enemies.
We get to end of life and then begin thinking of replacements.
Yeah. So that's how we do things.
Yeah. There's another question above. So is utilizing police reader, can doubling down on UAVs, MUMTs like CATS, Swift, etc., provide an effective deterrent to 5G fighters like J-20, J-35, or even allow us to leapfrog a generation in air power? Absolutely. See, the whole point of evolving multiple generations of stealth aircraft, particularly for the Chinese, is to go to better and better RCS airframes, right? Among other things, among other capabilities. But so with each newer generation, you would see that, that is the hope for any, industrial capability, right? Is that you get a marked significant jump in performance. So be it in engine performance or, airframe performance or RCS or, weapons performance or networking. But you would assume that you try to get progress in every department. So if we cannot build the AMCA before 2035, the best bet is to double down on the CATS program and everything below that, right? And build mass. If even if you can't combat in RCS terms, right? So networking numbers are possible, feasible with the CATS program, SWIFT program, right? MUMT. I think New Space's vehicle is called the Abhimanyu, right? So all of these are a way out for you to build mass. If you're rate limited, if your fighter production is rate limited by engine supply, how else do you build numbers, right? And this is the future. I'm sure the Chinese are working on it. They have a whole host of UAV programs, right, that they've been trying out for donkey's years now. Something somewhere, I'm sure they might find a good solution or a set of solutions to work. So then you would really have a bigger problem at hand. So now is your time to go full throttle on all of these programs and get them to work. Get them in the air. I'm sure you can work out architectures, communication systems, manage,
You will have to work those out.
Yeah, building. You need space capability also if you want to, talk back to home. So all of these are required.
Is a sine qua non, and that is where we are lagging, as we keep saying.
The thumbnail for this video, by the way, is a graphic generated by the FCAS group, right? If you look at it closely. So you will see all of these elements: HAPS, satellites, MRTT, the frontline fighters, loyal wingmen, long-range missiles, all of them put together. It's not just one. You need all of these components.
Yeah, you need, but you also have to cheer about what is really going to work. These are all in the exploratory stage. And the other
Correct.
thing is, well, these can help us overwhelm the Western adversary, that is Pakistan. The Chinese are already working on this in a major way. So
Correct.
we will at most achieve some kind of parity with them if we go about, in a very concerted manner. And we would have to look at other approaches to gain the edge. Right now, we don't have the edge with them in the air. That is quite clear. We have an edge with them in certain other domains where no point in outlining them. But we do have, it's not as if, they have the overwhelming edge in every domain. They don't. But we have to work a lot on those domains to ensure that we can counterbalance them. We have to think about it in slightly asymmetric terms at the moment. In some cases, we have to match them symmetrically. In some, it will be asymmetric. Okay, let us take the last few questions for today.
Mainek Barman. Yeah. Thanks for the good work. Yeah, thank you so much. Almost intact debris of PL-15 missiles. Can we get any real valuable data from those? Yes, of course. Right. So you can get if the electronics survive, at least physically, you can figure out their computing power, right? If the ESA antenna survived, you can figure out peak radiated power. You probably can't do algorithms, but at least the physical bits, peak power, how long the battery lasts when the missile goes active. You could even find out traces of the propellant in the back, figure out how long the burns are and how they might, actually work the missile in terms of getting to the target. I'm sure a lot of very valuable information can be gleaned. Even the composition of the propellants that are being used, is it a dual pulse motor, single pulse motor? All of these things have operational relevance. So I'm sure they're going over all of this with a fine-tuned tooth comb. Even stuff like fins, right? You can probably figure out how many G's it can pull, right? And how to make it lose lock. Yeah. A lot of really, key bits of information can be gleaned. And I'm sure a lot of this information is vital for everybody else.
Materials, the inner materials used. That is also very important.
You could even find out where they source it from. If it's coming from outside the country, you can target that, right? Components, electronic components, all of that.
You can hit them strategically if you know the supply chain well, in various ways. Because that you'll have to do anyway. Because you are faced with an enemy which has sort of, Popeye has eaten a lot of spinach in the last 10 years, especially. So let me put it that way, maybe 15. So that is the kind of enemy you're faced with at the moment.
Okay,
Okay.
so one more question that I
Couple
saw
of
was,
questions. Couple of questions,
what
right?
is it?
Quick one
I,
first is Onyx Prime.
yeah.
Would Uttam Mark II of the MWF go on the 97 Mark 1A? The Mark 1A has a bigger nose cone. The Uttam for the Mark II is actually a smaller aperture because it also has to work with the IRST. The only issue is it draws more power, but I think if the Air Force wants it,
Okay.
they might either pick the Mark 1A's radar itself or transplant it, but it might need more work for this particular airframe. I don't think they'll go through that trouble. We might see more of the
Anyway,
Mark 1A itself.
so we have
Um,
guess what? Thank you for your contribution. Asking what is the current status of Astra Mark II and Uttam. Astra Mark II should have entered LSP limited series production by now. If you go by what has been doing the rounds here and there, and Uttam, of course, it is more or
Ready.
less ready for integration now. So
Yeah.
you can, if you wanted to, you could have integrated from the 21st unit itself. But now
Yeah.
you'll do it from the 41st.
41st.
Well, yeah.
Pralay, Kyosam, Kyusha, Saw. Saw and Pralay orders are already in place. Kusha will only begin developmental trials sometime soon. So
Kusha,
orders are good 3-4 years
yeah,
away at least.
yeah. More,
QRSAM orders
man.
will come this year. NGAM, I think Adani said orders are very soon in the future, in the near
Okay,
future.
next question is Jago Hindu Jago asks, thank you for your contribution. Hi sir, what's the status of Nitra Mark II A321
We already
reactor?
talked about it.
Whose fault is the delay of G engines? HAL or G? One analyst claims it's HAL.
It isn't HAL's problem.
Okay, very good. I think you should anyway.
Yeah, it isn't
Then,
HAL's fault at all.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, hi.
Uh,
Okay, Dipon Gupta, thank you for your contribution. Is asking, hi, is hypersonic cruise missile even achievable at
yeah.
those speeds plasma forms? Yes, and
Yeah.
you tend to use the plasma in a certain way, and it is
Yeah.
part and parcel of the sort of aerodynamics of any hypersonic system. And yes, you can
Yeah.
hypersonic
The
cruise
Zircon
missiles are
exists.
feasible.
It's supposed to
Yeah.
hit a peak Mach 8 speed.
Wait, it doesn't hit Mark 8 really. That is the Russian claim is actually Mark 9. But even if it hits Mark 6,
Even Mach 6 is quick.
yeah, very quick.
What exactly
So,
is the technical difference between export models and original model? Did China really send export versions of their weapons to Pakistan? Export weapons usually are supposed to be slightly downgraded versions. Every country which develops weapons ideally thinks that it should hold on to the maximum capability of any particular weapon. So when they sell it, they would either sell it at say 90% or 80%, roughly speaking. Yeah, I mean it's not exact. 90-80% of the true capability of any weapon system. As far as the Pakistanis are concerned, the Chinese might have given them a proper full-scale missile. You never know, because the Chinese are not going to fire it at anybody. If they want true real-world, feedback data of their usage, then the Pakistanis are your best bet, because everybody knows that they're idiots and will provoke a fight with us, right? So there is very good chance that your missile will get fired in anger, like the
yeah,
M120C.
like it did. And but Pakistan has become a proving ground for Chinese weapons. There's no doubt about
Yeah,
that.
we
So
figured out their radars are
yeah.
useless.
But it also means that it is unlikely that the Chinese will transfer DF-17s to the Pakistanis unless if the DF-17 is transferred, I would sort of venture. Then it means that they are definitely thinking about that joint air and space scenario that we keep talking about. If DF-17s are indeed transferred, they will not transfer such systems unless they intend their use. I mean, they want the Pakistanis to use them essentially.
Hmm.
So that this is something we must keep in mind. Anyway, with I think we've
Just
gone
one
on
last
for a
question.
bit.
One
Yeah,
last
okay.
question. Will the M88 work with Tejas without compromising on performance? Will M88 core work with Kaveri? I mean, it's slightly short on performance when you compare it to the 404, but I mean, if push comes to shove and we're forced to pick it, I think you can make it work. But yeah, this putting in the effort to make the Kaveri work would give us a lot more returns.
M88 with 75 kilonewton is definitely going to lead to operational shortfalls for the Tejas Mark 1A. There's no doubt about that, right? That's a good 9 kilonewton less than the max thrust that the Iron 20 generate, therefore 04
Mm.
iron. Your best bet there is something else, which the easiest thing to shoehorn would have actually been the EJ200, but then you just swap one problematic
Unreliable
out for
supplier
yeah.
to another.
You don't
To a
that
whole
doesn't.
bunch of other.
So
The
there's a
entire
whole
EU.
the next episode will probably be another engine centric episode. Okay, we'll talk again about what we should do and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that. Anyway,
Yep.
thanks for joining in. I think we tried to answer a few questions today. And again, I would reiterate that we have to focus on the ISR front in the next 12 months or so, 12 to 18 months. That's our window probably. And we need to focus on it in a concerted manner. Many gaps have been filled. The government has filled many gaps, I agree. But this is a glaring gap that needs to be filled pronto. And we need to leverage private capabilities to, private capacity and capability to achieve the same. With that, we'll be signing off for today. As always, Jai Hind.
Thank you. Bye bye.